ago had smashed and buried. Researchers wondered who could have smashed this beautiful work of art, and why. To find these answers, we have to go back in time to the year 1519, when Mexico City, one of the world's largest and most populated cities, did not yet exist. In its place was an extraordinary and incredible city, Tenochtitlan. This was the capital and the heart of the grandiose Aztec Empire. The monarch, who had the power of life and death over his subjects, was Montezuma II, descendant of another Montezuma, the great leader who founded the empire and built the grand monuments at Tenochtitlan. Like his ancestor, Montezuma was a highly religious sovereign, particularly devoted to the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, to whom hundreds of temples were dedicated. Quetzalcoatl was an extremely benevolent god, the only god in the Aztec pantheon opposed to human sacrifices. The sacred texts state that the god had left the land promising that he would return to redeem his people. And according to the Aztec calendar, the year 1519, by our current calendar, ended one of the sacred cycles. This meant that Quetzalcoatl would soon return, and that's what Montezuma thought when he heard of the floating mountain on the sea. But in 1519, it was not a god that arrived, but conquistador Hernan Cortes. And the floating mountain was a Spanish galleon full of soldiers and weapons. Thinking he was a god, the Aztecs received Cortes with honors and adulation. In return, Cortes went on to destroy the Aztec capital and exterminate its population. Montezuma died, and his successor, Cuitlahuac, was forced to surrender. But how was such a rout possible? The invaders wielded devastating weapons and equipment completely unknown to the indigenous population: cannons, rifles, pistols, and horses, which proved to be formidable war machines. The conquistadors inadvertently brought another devastating weapon, a viral disease, smallpox. Smallpox found virgin territory in the New World. Millions died, over 2/3 of the Aztec population. Among them, the last king, Cuauhtémoc, whose death marked the end of the great ancient civilization of the Aztecs. Maybe if there were no disease, the Aztec soldiers might have fared better against the invaders. They were considered noble warriors and often used predators like eagles as their symbols of strength. These 6-foot statues, now in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, depict how they would have looked. The statues once guarded the gates to a temple called, appropriately, Temple of the Warriors. Tenochtitlan was a grand city that stood in the middle of a large lake on a plateau surrounded by mountains. The first inhabitants of the area were tenacious souls who did not shy away from hardship. They transformed their settlement into one of the most extensive and populous metropolises of the then-known world. Their projects included dams, canals, and the draining of swamps. When the soldiers would come back from victorious battles with their spoils of war, they would visit the big market of Tlatelolco. Here they might try to bargain for some precious fabric or rare bird feathers to enrich their attire. Tlatelolco stood at the present site of Mexico City's Plaza de las Tres Culturas. Remains of the ancient Aztec market are still found here, along with traces of a more recent past. Archaeologists have unearthed a main pyramid, rebuilt 14 times, along with other pyramids, platforms, stairs, and altars. In the middle of the plaza stands the Baroque church of Santiago de Tlatelolco, and not far off, the modern-day Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Unfortunately, to build this skyscraper and the adjacent road, the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl and a minor temple dedicated to his worship were sacrificed. Tlatelolco probably wasn't much different from a modern Mexican market. The faces, the voices, the smells, and the many colors of the fruits, vegetables, spices, meats, and other goods for sale are probably the same. Europeans owe the richness of their cuisine to the peoples of America. Until they discovered the New World, they knew nothing of potatoes, tomatoes, corn, peppers, or eggplant. At Tlatelolco, fabrics, skins, pottery, and other commonly used objects were displayed and traded by Aztec merchants called Pochtecans. They would hawk their goods not for currency like gold coins, but in trade for precious cocoa beans. The market was the commercial heart of their world, but it was also the unfortunate theater for the last desperate resistance by the Aztecs during the siege of their capital in the year 1521. After the Spaniards conquered the area, they started building structures of their own, like the Cathedral of Mexico City. But instead of quarrying for new stones, they used stones from an Aztec temple dedicated to the god Huitzilopochtli. Construction of the cathedral was begun in 1573, but 250 years would pass before it was finished, ending up as a mix of very different styles. In spite of great efforts to consolidate its foundations, the cathedral is now unavoidably sinking into the swampy ground, an ironic end to a monument erected by the conquistadors to erase all traces of the glorious Tenochtitlan. Until the year 1978, it appeared as though the invaders had succeeded in their malicious intent. But then something completely unexpected happened. During excavation work for the Mexico City subway, workers digging a trench near the cathedral stumbled upon pieces of a gigantic and mysterious oval stone with a diameter of over 7 feet and a weight of nearly 9 tons. The stone was immediately identified as an Aztec relic and was truly an extraordinary find, inaugurating a new era for modern Mexican archaeology. The earth would soon yield the ancient vestiges of Tenochtitlan, an exceptional discovery comparable to that of the city of Troy. The archaeologist in charge of the work couldn't have had a more apt name: Eduardo Matos Montezuma. He decided to demolish a whole block of the modern city and give back to Mexicans the heart of their ancient capital. From the many relics that have now been discovered, scientists are able to imagine how the magnificent ancient capital might have looked. The center of Tenochtitlan, situated between the cathedral and the Palacio Nacional on the Grand Plaza of the Zócalo, was mainly a place of worship, full of temples erected on the tops of pyramids with their characteristic steep stairways and colorful wall paintings. The city, at an elevation of over 6,500 feet, was surrounded by the lake, hills, and mountains. It was connected to the mainland by many causeways and interlaced with navigable canals. It was a great metropolis with over 1,200,000 inhabitants. The ceremonial center, Teocalli, had many temples dedicated to important gods. The most imposing was the Templo Mayor, the religious heart of Tenochtitlan, the destination for pilgrims and home for priests and divinities. Only priests were allowed to climb to the top of the pyramid and enter the two temples. On either side of the temple, there were two other sacred constructions dedicated to the gods Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca. Teocalli also had dwellings reserved for those in the priesthood and playing fields for an Aztec ball game, which had more of a spiritual meaning than a sporting one. The players were the priests themselves. And lastly, there was the famous Altar of the Skulls, the Tzompantli, where the craniums of human sacrifice victims were displayed. For the Aztecs, religious rites and sacrifices were a necessity, the only way to earn the benevolence of the gods. They believed they were warding off famine, natural disasters, and defeats in battle. And the greatest sacrifice they could make was a human one. The priests made them lie on their backs on narrow sacrificial stones, then cut open their chests and pulled out pulsating hearts as an offering to the idols before them. This description by a Spaniard illustrates one of these sacrifices, made in honor of Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war. There were quite a lot of Aztec gods that demanded human sacrifices. Tlaloc, the god of rain. Coatlicue, the earth goddess, depicted as an old masked woman wearing a narrow skirt tied at the waist with a belt of serpents. Xiuhtecuhtli, god of fire. Mayahuel, goddess of inebriating beverages, especially the most popular at the time, pulque. The excavation work of ancient Tenochtitlan lasted 5 years and brought to light over 7,000 objects, including sculptures, small artifacts, votive offerings, and the skulls of sacrifice victims. Most of the relics are kept in the very modern Museo del Templo Mayor. The stone that sparked the excavation work is in the place of honor in the center of the museum. The disc is decorated with a bas-relief portraying the goddess Coyolxauhqui, she who paints her face with bells, the Aztec moon goddess. Her body appears dismembered on the sculpted surface. According to legend, she was killed and cut to pieces by her brother, the god of war, who held her responsible for having tried to kill their mother, Coatlicue, goddess of the earth. Another wonderful relic in the museum, and the only one of its kind, is this terracotta statue of the Bat God, a divinity of the underworld for worship of the dead. There are also many masks portraying the deceased and mythological beings. The Aztec people were filled with supernatural and mythological tales. Elders spoke of a magical and rich city with splendid palaces that existed right here on Earth. The city was called Teotihuacan, the place where men became gods. These pyramids and ruins are what remains of this once majestic city. In the 4th and 5th centuries, the 6th largest city in the world. When the Aztecs lived, the place was abandoned, partially swallowed up by the jungle. But the Aztecs still believed that the incredible pyramids were built by the gods thousands of years earlier, and they made pilgrimages to the site. Archaeologists found that the city of Teotihuacan was established in 200 BC by the peoples of the Mexico Valley. The pyramids Some of the most extraordinary monuments in the Americas were built around 200 AD. At its zenith, Teotihuacan had grown to cover an area of almost 8 square miles and had almost 200,000 inhabitants. The monumental complex lies in the high Anahuac Valley in a barren and arid landscape that heightens its magical and mysterious atmosphere. It now attracts numerous people who gather here regularly to celebrate the rite of the Salute to the Sun. The city is bisected by a grand avenue, 130 feet wide and over a mile long, that is called the Avenue of the Dead. To the east stands Tepantitla, a building complex rich in murals. The paintings depict Tlalocan, a paradise with abundant water, butterflies, and flowers. Tlalocan was the world that was governed by Tlaloc, the god of rain. At the end of the Avenue of the Dead is the Ciutadella, the citadel, at whose center stands the pyramid dedicated to the god Quetzalcoatl. It is one of the most important buildings in the area. Next to its base are statues carved out of limestone and painted with natural pigments that used to decorate the pyramid. They represent the feathered serpent Quetzalcoatl. Originally, they were painted in bright colors. The undulating bodies of the serpents emerged from the walls of the pyramids, and the god's head was wreathed in a crown of feathers. In 1986, the excavations of the Ciutadella yielded an exceptional find, a sepulchre with the skeletons of 18 priests killed during a sacrifice. Until then, it was believed that only prisoners, slaves, or enemies were sacrificed on the altars. Here was proof that the rite of sacrifice did not discriminate. The most imposing sight, however, is in the Plaza del Sol. Along with the ruins of an altar and several temples stands the Pyramid of the Sun. 230 feet tall, 740 feet long on each side of the base, it is almost as big as the Egyptian Pyramid of Cheops at Giza, one of the 7 wonders of the world. Thousands of tourists make the steep but memorable climb to the top, a perfect place to take in the majesty of the entire complex. Ancient civilizations believed that both the sun and the moon were created at this site. From here you can also see the other great pyramid of Teotihuacan, the Pyramid of the Moon. Smaller than the Sun Pyramid, it's 130 feet high with a square base measuring 460 feet on each side. Yet despite these structures that have seemed to last an eternity, no one has figured out why the city and the culture disappeared so suddenly. The end apparently came around 750 AD. Some archaeologists feel the city was destroyed and burned, and its inhabitants fled. But no one knows who was responsible for the massacre, or what became of the survivors. Other experts have linked the decline of Teotihuacan simply to a change in the climate, which may have caused the already dry area to become uninhabitable. But that would not explain the fires and the devastation. Thus, the mystery of the lost city of Teotihuacan, where men became gods, lives on. One of the most incredible finds in the history of Mexican archaeology is the Sunstone. Miraculously escaping the fury of the Spanish, it was found in 1790 in Mexico City and incorporated into the eastern facade of the cathedral. The fascinating symbols incised into this Aztec treasure placed it at the center of numerous religious events. The relic can now be seen at the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. a museum that contains many testaments to the origins and the histories of the peoples who populated Central America over the course of the millennia. A beautifully sculpted monkey-shaped receptacle made of extremely fragile black obsidian. Heads carved in volcanic rock with eyes and teeth made of mother-of-pearl and pupils of pyrite. Terracotta pipes, musical instruments, and thousands of other objects from the great Aztec culture. But perhaps the most precious is the Sunstone. Archaeologists studied the disk for years in an attempt to reveal the mystery of its symbols. Today, they think they have the answer. The Sunstone is a calendar, actually a double calendar. The complicated symbols refer both to a division of time based on religious precepts, where the solar year is 260 days long, and to a non-religious one, which divides the year exactly into 365 days. Other symbols describe the life of the planet, breaking it down into 5 solar ages, the so-called cosmogonic suns, and date the creation of the world to the 13th of August, 3114 BC, and its end to the 22nd of December, 2012. There are different interpretations, and there are certainly many mysteries still hidden in the signs inscribed on the Sunstone by wise hands. Perhaps time alone can give us the final answer. Mexico City today is one of the world's largest capitals, and unfortunately, one of the most polluted, with millions of vehicles. It is a city of contradictions, where skyscrapers crowd the center and miserable shanties form a belt in the vast outskirts. Much has been done to restore dignity to the Indios, the direct descendants of the Aztecs, but the wounds inflicted by a brutal conquest half a millennium ago are still visible everywhere you look. There is one area, however, in the south of the city, where one can still find solace in the ancient ways. Called Xochimilco, this part of the modern city still conserves characteristics of the ancient Tenochtitlan. It has canals that wind among the chinampas, the floating gardens that were obtained by draining the swampland, the same technique that allowed the Aztecs to create their capital. On Sundays, the zone becomes crowded with people having their meals on brightly colored boats, with mariachi bands playing music, singing of unrequited love, sad songs, just like this poem written over 500 years ago by an Aztec prince. Shall I thus pass away like the flowers that fade? Will there be nothing left of my name, nothing of my fame on earth? Let there at least be flowers. Let there at least be song. What can my heart do? Without purpose, we passed through this world. But they did have a purpose. The Aztec warriors and the rulers who gave their lives in defense of this great civilization may indeed have felt a desperation at the end. But there is something left of their fame on earth. And the flowers are here too. But they're made of stone, and they're called pyramids. And they have the sun to crown them for all eternity.
A 1,000 years ago, Indian empires flourished in what is now Mexico and Guatemala. People built incredible cities and awesome pyramids. They often used these same pyramids, however, for a grim ritual. The sacrifice of human beings. What sort of men were these? what dark secrets are entombed inside their massive pyramids. Vast areas of Central America are dense, uninhabited jungle. For centuries, the only regular visitors have been men known as chicleros. They come in search of the chicle tree, from whose sap chewing gum is made. Often, it was these chicleros who first discovered towering, vine-shrouded mounds, ancient stone pyramids. All over Mexico and Guatemala, pyramids lie in ruins, remains of many separate Indian cultures, some dating back thousands of years. The few pyramids that have been restored are among the most awesome works of antiquity. In Cholula, there is a pyramid which in volume is the largest building on Earth. 1,400 feet on each side, it covers 45 acres. To probe its construction, archaeologists dug 4 miles of tunnels inside the pyramid. They found steps of 3 earlier pyramids built one on top of another. The oldest dates back some 1,800 years. In the heart of Mexico City, workers are digging out an Aztec pyramid. Covering 2 city blocks, the ruins consist of 9 overlapping pyramids. Archaeologists are restoring the original appearance. It was here in 1520 that Spanish conquistadores, led by Hernan Cortez, marveled at a gleaming white pyramid 100 feet high. It supported temples dedicated to the chief Aztec gods. The many temples and plazas comprised one of the great religious and ceremonial centers of ancient Mexico. When the Spaniards arrived in the New World, most of these pyramids were already in ruins, sources of mystery even to the native peoples. Later, travelers in Mexico who knew that the Egyptian pyramids were burial monuments asked whether the pyramids of Mexico might contain tombs or buried treasures. When none was found, they wondered what strange meaning these pyramids might have had. Ancient American pyramids are found in the ruins of great architectural complexes. At the top of each pyramid is a platform reached by a steep staircase. Here stands a temple consisting of a few dark rooms. Why did these tiny temples require such massive bases? Near Mexico City sprawl the sun-baked ruins of Teotihuacan, largest and most mysterious city of ancient America. Dominating its avenues are huge pyramids. Here, the enigmas begin. Facing west, the largest pyramid of Teotihuacan was dedicated to the sun god. Only half the height of the largest Egyptian pyramid, the Pyramid of the Sun nevertheless covers the same immense area, almost 600,000 square feet. If the builders had contact with Egypt, no one can say. Recently, an ancient tunnel was discovered under the Sun Pyramid. It leads to a natural cavern where only a few pottery shards have been found. To Mexican Indians, caves symbolize Mother Earth. Some archaeologists believe the cave was the legendary birthplace of the pyramid builders' tribe. Its discovery has fueled speculation that somewhere in the huge bulk of the pyramid are hidden chambers, perhaps even a tomb. 300 meters from the Sun Pyramid is a group of ancient holes forming a triple cross. From this spot, on June 21st, the longest day of the year, the sun can be seen to rise over the pyramid's third notch, precisely marking the summer solstice. Of the people who built Teotihuacan, little is known. To their origin, we have scarcely a clue. The city flourished for centuries. Then, suddenly, 1,200 years ago, it was burnt and abandoned for reasons unknown. No other great city left so few traces of its demise. No hieroglyphic writing or apocalyptic legends record the city's end. Did the climate change suddenly? Could disease, hunger, and civil strife have made the city vulnerable to invaders from the north? Why was their city of over 200,000 laid out in such precise grids? What was their religion? Who were their gods? We are still searching for clues. One pyramid is decorated with great serpents. The snake heads resemble Quetzalcoatl, an important Mexican deity of later centuries. A strange blend of God, man, and beast, he was revered for introducing learning and art. He shares the pyramid with Tlaloc, the fierce Mexican rain god. Remarkably, the same goggle eyes are found 700 miles to the east in ruined cities whose people we do know. They were a separate culture, the Maya, and were somehow connected to Teotihuacan. Within a century of the end of Teotihuacan, the Mayan Empire also collapsed. At the Mayan center of Chichen Itza, there is a temple known as the Caracol. It was a solar and astronomical observatory used 1,000 years ago by Mayan priests. Night after night, astronomer priests charted the movements of heavenly bodies, making sightings with sticks or hollow tubes. Despite their lack of modern instruments, these early astronomers created a solar calendar whose accuracy was unrivaled until the 19th century. They recorded the rising of stars, had an excellent lunar calendar, and could warn of eclipses years in advance. The Dresden Codex, an ancient Mayan manuscript, preserves their calculation of the motions of Venus, accurate to 1 hour in a span of 300 years. For the Maya, the cycle of day and night was linked to the supernatural world of life and death. The 9 tiers of their pyramids represented the 9 levels of the underworld. Why, if the pyramids were connected with death, did they not have tombs? In 1949, archaeologist Alberto Ruz was exploring a pyramid at the Mayan center of Palenque. To his surprise, he uncovered a rubble-filled staircase leading down to the heart of the pyramid. At the bottom of the staircase, Ruz found skeletons of several youths, perhaps placed there as guardians. Then, he broke through to a large vaulted room. Around the walls were stucco reliefs of Mayan gods, known as Lords of Darkness. In the center of the chamber, Dr. Ruz saw a huge stone monolith covered with carvings.
We lifted the flat inscribed stone and found a large opening that was covered with another stone. We lifted that one too and found a sarcophagus in which appeared a skeleton of a man with all his jade jewelry.
Over the man's face was a mask made of 200 jade pieces, to the Mayans, more precious than gold. The sarcophagus lid, its colors restored, shows a priest looking up through sacred trees. It appears the lid was intended to help the deceased to heavenly paradise. The pyramids, however, had another more grisly connection with death. They were often the scene of grim ceremonies ending in human sacrifice. Why were such technically advanced people so mesmerized by blood and death? When archaeologists excavated the Caracol at Chichen Itza, they found 14 skulls on a platform adjoining the main stairway. The skulls belonged to victims of human sacrifice. The most common form of sacrifice, the heart was torn, still beating, from the victim's chest by the high priest and offered to the gods. The victims were prisoners of war, slaves, or even devout volunteers. Often, the body was divided among priests and populace and eaten.
According to Dr. Roos, we don't know whether the Mayans performed sacrifices on the tops of the pyramids. For the Aztecs, we have information from the writings of the chroniclers, including some drawings. And there you can see that they made human sacrifices in front of the temple on the tops of the pyramids. After they killed the sacrificial victims, they threw them down the stairs.
In front of the Pyramid of Mexico City was a bizarre structure called the Skull Rack. According to Spanish reports, it contained 136,000 human heads. The Aztec obsession with sacrifice was no isolated example. 5 centuries earlier, the Mayans of Chichen Itza also practiced sacrifice. It is believed that this platform once supported poles on which were stacked the heads of sacrificial victims. There were many situations that called for sacrifice. The rain god had to be appeased. And to protect the sun during its nightly passage through the underworld, priests felt compelled to make daily offerings of human hearts and blood. Ancient Mexican and Mayan art is rich in death-inspired images. Nightmare visions of the grotesque, the fantastic, and the terrifying abound. The famous calendar stone, found near the Aztec pyramid, embodies the highest flowering of their science and art. At its center is the sun god. Sticking out in the form of a knife, his tongue depicts the god's incessant demand to be fed with human hearts and blood. Why were these people so preoccupied with death? How could cultures so advanced in art and science be so obsessed by blood and sacrifice? They were a people who invented zero and counted time in the millions of years. Yet, slaughter fascinated them more than anything else. In the shadow of the pyramid was the bustling marketplace. Amidst clay pots and garden vegetables, a young man leads a procession. He is dressed in the garb of the god to whom he will be sacrificed. Such sacrificial victims felt especially honored, since their souls would rise to the house of the sun. For ancient Mexicans, there were no absolute barriers between the living and the dead. They feared death, but believed it flowed naturally from life. We know their descendants, simple corn farmers living in the torrid plains and jungle villages of Central America. In the Yucatan, most of the villagers are pure Mayan. Today, the Mayans' descendants remain suspended between ancient and modern worlds, tied to unfathomed mysteries in the buried cities of their ancestors. Deep in the Guatemala jungle is the most awesome of all Mayan ruins, the fabulous city of Tikal. Like ancient skyscrapers, its huge pyramids pierce the rainforest canopy. They support dark, narrow temples with walls up to 40 feet thick. Crowning the temples are giant roof cones covered with ornate but decaying sculpture. Once, gleaming white plaster coated the pyramids. Temples were painted a gaudy red. Great crowds gathered in the plazas to watch spectacles of pomp and sacrifice.
La población no tenía acceso.
The population didn't have access to the temples, which were on tops of the pyramids. The only ones allowed were the priests. For the ordinary people, the pyramids were proof that the ruling class had great power, that they had better obey.
Perhaps the pyramids were symbols of ruling class power, designed to awe and frighten the populace. The pyramid stairs are so steep that some tourists have slipped and fallen to their deaths. Perhaps they were built so that bodies of sacrificial victims would roll unimpeded to the ground. Everywhere at Tikal are altars paired with vertical stones called stelae. A common theme of altar carvings is the bound prisoner destined for decapitation. On one stone, skull and thigh bones represent the captive, dispatched by two executioners with stone knives. Why are there so many altars at Tikal? Could it have known the horrors of mass sacrifice? More than 50,000 people once lived in Tikal. But in 889 AD, the dates carved in stone suddenly stopped. The city was mysteriously abandoned. The whole Mayan Empire collapsed. No one knows why. The jungle has today reclaimed its territory. Once gleaming temples have crumbled to ruin. No other civilizations vanished so mysteriously. Most experts believe the city dwellers fled to small villages, leaving the ceremonial centers empty. Why did they leave? What chased them out? In ancient America, gods and men met in ways we may never understand. Animalistic, fatalistic, and magical ideas ruled supreme. For these peoples, reality was multi-leveled, like the steps of their pyramids. In a system of mystical thinking alien to us, pyramids were symbolic stairways to heaven, the ultimate in spiritual technology. Somewhere in the vast gulf between the pyramid builders' accomplishments and their practices lies the answer to their mysterious disappearance. Primeval jungle spreads round Tikal in every direction. The dense rainforest covers 20,000 square miles, concealing countless ruins. Archaeologists are just now uncovering what could be the greatest ruin of all. 50 miles north of Tikal, an old Mayan road stretches toward the unexcavated city of El Mirador and its giant rubble-covered pyramids. Today, El Mirador is almost completely concealed by vegetation. Both larger and older than Tikal, it may be the first true city of the Americas. At El Mirador, archaeologists hope
Tlatelolco stood at the present site of Mexico City's Plaza de la Tres Culturas. Remains of the ancient Aztec market are still found here, along with traces of a more recent past. Archaeologists have unearthed a main pyramid, rebuilt 14 times, along with other pyramids, platforms, stairs, and altars. In the middle of the plaza stands the Baroque church of Santiago de Tlatelolco, and not far off, the modern-day Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Unfortunately, to build this skyscraper and the adjacent road, the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl and a minor temple dedicated to his worship were sacrificed. Tlatelolco probably wasn't much different from a modern Mexican market. The faces, the voices, the smells, and the many colors of the fruits, vegetables, spices, meats, and other goods for sale are probably. Quetzalcoatl was an extremely benevolent god, the only god in the Aztec pantheon opposed to human sacrifices. The sacred texts state that the god had left the land promising that he would return to redeem his people. And according to the Aztec calendar, the year 1519, by our current calendar, ended one of the sacred cycles. This meant that Quetzalcoatl would soon return, and that's what Montezuma thought when he heard of the floating mountain on the sea. But in 1519, it was not a god that arrived, but conquistador Hernan Cortes. And the floating mountain was a Spanish galleon full of soldiers and weapons. Thinking he was a god, the Aztecs received Cortes with honors and adulation. In return, Cortes went on to destroy the Aztec capital and exterminate its population. Montezuma died, and his successor, Cuitlahuac, was strength. These 6-foot statues, now in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City, depict how they would have looked. The statues once guarded the gates to a temple called, appropriately, Temple of the Warriors. Tenochtitlan was a grand city that stood in the middle of a large lake on a plateau surrounded by mountains. The first inhabitants of the area were tenacious souls who did not shy away from hardship. They transformed their settlement into one of the most extensive and populous metropolises of the then-known world. Their projects included dams, canals, and the draining of swamps. When the soldiers would come back from victorious battles with their spoils of war, they would visit the big market of Tlatelolco. Here they might try to bargain for some precious fabric or rare bird feathers to enrich their attire. Tlatelolco had smashed and buried. Researchers wondered who could have smashed this beautiful work of art, and why. To find these answers, we have to go back in time to the year 1519, when Mexico City, one of the world's largest and most populated cities, did not yet exist. In its place was an extraordinary and incredible city, Tenochtitlan. This was the capital and the heart of the grandiose Aztec Empire. The monarch, who had the power of life and death over his subjects, was Montezuma II, descendant of another Montezuma, the great leader who founded the empire and built the grand monuments at Tenochtitlan. Like his ancestor, Montezuma was a highly religious sovereign, particularly devoted to the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, to whom hundreds of temples were dedicated. Quetzal forced to surrender. But how was such a rout possible? The invaders wielded devastating weapons and equipment completely unknown to the indigenous population: cannons, rifles, pistols, and horses, which proved to be formidable war machines. The conquistadors inadvertently brought another devastating weapon, a viral disease, smallpox. Smallpox found virgin territory in the New World. Millions died, over 2/3 of the Aztec population. Among them, the last king, Cuauhtémoc, whose death marked the end of the great ancient civilization of the Aztecs. Maybe if there were no disease, the Aztec soldiers might have fared better against the invaders. They were considered noble warriors and often used predators like eagles as their symbols of